You know that moment when you set a mug of coffee next to a stack of old papers, and 10 minutes later, the coffee has gone cold because the papers took over? That's the feeling I get with the business plot. Once you land on Smedley Butler, the decorated Marine with 2 Medals of Honor, the whole thing stops feeling like a dusty rumor and starts feeling like somebody tried to turn a war hero into political hardware. Butler was exactly the kind of person you'd want if you were trying to sell a national project to veterans. Famous, trusted, tough enough that people listened when he spoke. So the alleged approach from Gerald McGuire, a bond salesman, is what makes this story snap into focus. McGuire reportedly kept coming back with one idea: build a massive veterans movement, not just for influence, but to pressure Franklin Roosevelt. Imagine being Butler in 1933, with the country still in the Depression, and hearing that pitch: follow the money, and the pitch gets sharper. Butler testified that people around McGuire talked about up to $50 million and about mobilizing hundreds of thousands of veterans, maybe through the American Legion or something like it. The alleged model wasn't subtle: a veterans organization shaped along fascist lines, with European movements as the template. And then there's the title they allegedly had in mind for Butler: Secretary of General Affairs. That phrase is so stiff, so bureaucratic, it almost hides what it sounds like: a made-up office for a regime nobody wanted to name out loud. In the version Butler described, Roosevelt would stay in place as a symbol while real power moved elsewhere, with business elites controlling policy from behind the scenes, and Butler didn't keep it private. In 1934, he gave sworn testimony before the House McCormack Dickstein Committee, the panel looking into un-American activity. His account was backed in part by reporter Paul Comely French, who said he had also met McGuire and heard similar talk. The committee later said there was no question the attempts had been discussed and planned, and that they might have been put into action if the money people thought it was worth the risk. No indictments followed. A lot of the testimony never really reached the public in the way you'd expect if the country had just dodged something huge. Butler's credibility only got more complicated a year later, when he published War is a Racket and became even more openly critical of corporate militarism. With no big crackdown, the press got to frame the story, and the split was stark. The New York Times treated Butler's revelations like a gigantic hoax. Other papers, especially the ones already wary of fascism, took them much more seriously. A media history analysis found the same divide. Outlets suspected of fascist sympathies tended to mock or minimize the plot, while anti-fascist papers treated it as real enough to investigate. That matters because Roosevelt had taken office in March 1933. The New Deal was moving, and some business elites saw a direct threat to property rights, corporate autonomy, and existing financial structures. So the press wasn't just reporting a scandal, it was deciding whether that larger conflict would be visible at all. What makes the business plot stick with me is that it's not a movie version of a coup. It's more awkward than that, and more revealing. It sits inside the Great Depression, veteran politics, elite money, and a public atmosphere already anxious about European fascism. The alleged conspirators wanted a mass veterans organization, separate from or in competition with the American Legion, to exert pressure or force Roosevelt aside. They allegedly had backers linked to DuPont and J.P. Morgan interests, and later accounts name figures like John W. Davis, Al Smith, Thomas Lamont, Grayson M.P. Murphy, and Prescott Bush, though the documentary record is contested and incomplete. Historians still argue over whether this was a serious coup attempt or a half-formed pressure tactic that never left the talking stage. That uncertainty is part of why the case still matters. The committee's final report said these attempts had been discussed, were planned, and might have been placed in execution. Yet no one was prosecuted, and without discovered operational plans, the story faded from mainstream attention, even as specialist histories kept it alive. Modern scholars still use it as a case study in democratic resilience, elite political intervention, and media framing of anti democratic threats. Which is uncomfortable, right? Because once you see that pattern, you start noticing how often nothing to see here is just a tidy sentence with bad intentions. So when I come back to that cold coffee and those old papers, I keep coming back to Smedley Butler sitting in the middle of the whole mess, refusing to give it cover. And the question is still the one that makes me lean in. How many bad ideas only look normal until somebody with real credibility says no?